down, yelling out money, anything. Hey, ooh, got the foot on the gas, pedal to the metal when I'm getting to the back. Hey, got the foot on the gas, pedal to the metal when the lane moving fast. Hey, hey, let them all cross. If they hate, then let them hate and make a bigger boss. Hey.
What is up, ladies and gentlemen? We are back. We are live. It is the Freight Coach Podcast, the top podcast in transportation, coming to you guys every single weekday, 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 10:30 Central, to break down some industry headlines. But most importantly, you guys provide some actual insight into what you can do with all of this information. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. This is the real side of freight, ladies and gentlemen. And I say that before every single show. And what I mean by that is I only speak with transportation professionals, because at the end of the day, I want to talk to the right individuals who have done what you're looking to do, or who are currently doing what you're trying to achieve, so you can take that information, apply it, utilize it, and see a meaningful difference in your business and your life. I got a very special guest for you guys here today. It's been like literally a year since she's been on the show. She's came on a few times now, and what she does in the report that she puts out I love reading it, because like as a business owner myself, I'm always looking for, how do I improve? How do I set myself up for success? How do I learn from what other companies are doing out there? Because in my opinion, you guys, success leaves clues. And when it comes to a very high turnover industry, specifically inside of trucking, because like that's what we talk about on this show, we don't talk about anything else. I want to know, if I owned a fleet, what practices should I follow to retain the best talent that's out there, to set myself up to get ahead of technology and things like that. But before we get into the episode here, you guys, I got to jump into This Week in Freight, powered by my friends over at DAT. And again, if you want your lane broke down on this show, I need you guys to email my team, podcast@thefreightcoach.com. We're going to take a little bit of a different approach on this here today, because they have a market conditions tool out there that I personally use every single time that I'm quoting out newer areas out there. So this, this map, you guys, it's in there. Like if you're familiar with Data IQ, you know where Rate View is. And then I go down and I check out the market conditions here as well. So we're going to be talking about dry van. And I think it's important to read like a 30-day cycle as we're going out there for any new lanes. But again, understanding the how the markets fluctuate throughout the year, and knowing where some of these dead zones are in historical dead zones. So it's like, if we're looking at Phoenix, Arizona, going to Los Angeles, California, for example, obviously you're going from a tight market to a tight market. But if you pull up the Rate View lane, you'll see it's actually pretty stable, right? Like there's not a ton of price increases or decreases. It's a very stable lane, but there's just tighter capacity that's going on out there. But if you're looking at Phoenix, Arizona, going to Albuquerque, New Mexico, you would think like, oh, it's a tight market, but it's going to a loose capacity market. What does that actually mean? And from my perspective, there are a couple of key areas in this country that no matter what's going on in the market, you got to add money onto your quotes. And, the New Mexico market or the Colorado market, I know right here it's showing slightly tight for dry vans, but those are historical markets where it's tough to get out of. So as you're looking at some of this stuff and a lot of these and a lot of the data points, the more familiar you get with some of these regions, the better equipped you're going to be to accurately price some of this. Because no matter what, you need to understand what the outbound market looks like. And so, our first, what we're looking at here, are Phoenix to Los Angeles, and it's showing a tight market to a tight market. I know there is a very high probability that the carrier who takes that load out of Phoenix to go into Los Angeles, high probability they are going to get freight out of there. But if you're looking at Phoenix going into Albuquerque or Phoenix going into Colorado, for example, there's a low probability that they are going to get freight out of there. They might sit there for a couple of days. And I know a lot of it's market specific, but I want you guys to understand how we read these things, because that affects if I'm going to get long-term pricing with my customer. Now, I'm of the mindset where I want to bring consistency to my customers' P&L when it comes to their freight spend. And I know that there's volatility and there's things that are going to happen out there that might change it, but I want to find that carrier that runs Phoenix to Albuquerque or Phoenix to Denver dry van consistently. And then we work out and we weather that storm a little bit. And we, again, like I've always mentioned, I like that $200 rate variance as my key stability marker. And I've just found that the carriers who run these lanes often they're going to deliver that information down to you. So it's like, as you're going out and you're building up some of these newer networks, understanding the outbound market drastically affects my pricing going into the inbound market here. And what I mean by that is understanding that outbound Albuquerque, for example, is pretty soft. There's not a lot of freight coming out of there. I look at that load to truck ratio that comes with it. And, you know, if there's 1,000 loads to 10,000 trucks, it's going to be pretty challenging for our drivers to get out of there. So you got to bake that rate into that outbound Phoenix quote that you're providing to your customers. So from my perspective, this map is crucial to look at, whether you're moving these lanes often or at the end of the day, if you're trying to get more cost effective and more educated on some of these markets. Being able to have those conversations with your customer it's very important, because at times we want to run and gun. We want to rush through some of these quotes, and a lot of our customers might not understand the finite reasons behind it, right? Like I always talk about with miles, but then again, explaining to your customer, like, hey, FYI, this is why this lane going into New Mexico is going to be exponentially more expensive, because not all 500 miles are created equally. And we need to understand that and bring that information down to our customers. Again, I use this map because I want people to understand seasonalities of it. And I want them to understand how lanes actually operate throughout the year, and why not all 500-mile runs, hypothetical example, are created equally. And that's why I love utilizing these tools inside of Data IQ, you guys. So check it out. Use this heat map, have a better understanding about what you guys are quoting out there, and deliver that granular information to your customers, you guys. So that's This Week in Freight. Again, we switched it up a little bit, and we're going to be switching it up for the rest of the week out here with flatbeds and reefers as well. But if you want your lane broken down on the show, I need you to email my team, podcast@thefreightcoach.com. So we're going to talk about the 2026 Best Fleets to Drive For report with my friend Jane from CarriersEdge. Jane, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, I'm glad to have you back on. You know, it has been like about a year since the last time you were on the show. And we were talking about this the last time. And, you know, for me, it's wild to read a lot of these reports that you see out there and a lot of the data, because, you know, again, as a business owner, I'm always looking for, how do I set my company up for success? How do I plan out that next 5-10 years of growth? Because like, we don't own trucks today, but that is on our roadmap of buying a fleet, right? Like, we want to acquire a truck and come. I say that because I'm done starting companies from zero and figuring it out. I feel like I would like to just buy a company that's got like 25, 50 trucks and go from there. But, you know, it's like, I read a lot of this stuff, and I read a lot of industry insight, because again, it's all out there by people who have already done it. So why not pay attention to all of that? But, you know, it's the 20th anniversary of this report as well. So that's what I've been
like 18, I think.
Okay. I went to public school, so forgive my math. But
you just rounded up. You did fine. It feels like 20 years, but it's not the 20th anniversary yet.
Okay. All right. But so when you're looking back over this time, Jane, what's one core value that you think has never changed in that timeline?
A core value of, well, there's things that have not changed for drivers, and the core value for fleets, I think, is communication. Honest communication is really what I think is at the basis of every successful fleet with their drivers. You know, I'm not talking necessarily about, you know, how rich you are, or how many trucks you have, and that kind of thing. But if you want to keep drivers, if you want to keep the good ones, if you want to, you know, improve your safety, improve your retention, then honest communication is really at the basis of it. And what drivers have always said for the last, and we'll say 20 years, is that one of the top things that they value are the people they work with. They always talk about feeling like family. Pay is also important, but it's not as important as feeling like family. And also how well a fleet communicates with them. If there's bad communication, then they always talk about communication. Like there's always like need to improve, need to improve, need to improve. When they have it, they feel like family. So it's a really interesting dichotomy, but it has not changed. I keep looking at all of these driver comments and the driver surveys, and it has not changed.
And that's the one thing, like as a broker, I think that like, I get a lot of heat when I say this as well. Like none of us are doing anything different than every other broker that's out there, right? Like we all have the same technology. We're all going after the same shippers. There's no secret shipper community out there that's not very well publicized on who they are, what freight they move. But fundamentally, your ability to communicate is the greatest value you can provide to the market, right? And I look at that driver community to the carriers that we work with, because I am of the mindset, and again, this is another thing that people love to critique me on. Yes, I understand I pay the carriers and like I'm kind of technically their customer in this transaction, but I don't view them as that, right? Like in my eyes, carriers and shippers are 1A and 1B of importance. And it's my job as a broker to communicate and facilitate that transaction, because my drivers, my trucking companies that we contract with, they're a direct representation of me out there in the market to my customers, right? My shippers. So it's like, why wouldn't I communicate with them? Why wouldn't I provide them with all the information I have to make it as successful as possible of a load? And again, I'm also old enough to realize that it's not all sunshine and gumdrops out there, but I also want to hold myself to a higher standard at this point in my life, no matter what, and understand that like, hey, we just got to provide all the information we can and we got to move on. But it's like, what you're talking about there in regards to communication, Jane, that's something that just seemingly affects every industry of all walks of life, every relationship. I think every unsuccessful relationship in your personal and professional life, you can probably tie it into a breakdown in communication of what caused why that relationship soured. Why is it so hard for people to do that?
I think it's a combination. There's so many things that if you put in there. There's a combination of expectations and communication, like expectations and what you get as a result. And that is where the breakdown really happens, is where people are thinking one thing and then something else happens. And if that something isn't a nice surprise, then it's going to be a negative surprise. But what I think is really interesting about what you just said about all of the different, how important that communication is. And when you say communication, it's one of those things that's like the word nice, right? It doesn't have a definition really. You kind of know it and you see it. Some people think it's, with the word nice, some people think it's better, people think it's worse, but it's not really defined. You can break communication or how you communicate with people down into very small parts and rules to follow and things to do or not do. And I think that's where AI can't really, right now, AI can't replace a human for that particular skill, because it's so nuanced and you have to be able to adjust for the situation right then. You can't, there's not a one size fits all. And with carriers and drivers, what we're finding is that the more you try and make a one size fits all in how you communicate with drivers, the less that drivers enjoy it, the less that drivers are going to be interested in sticking around. So one of the things that I always am really definite about is AI has a place. Don't make it your communicator. Don't do that, because drivers are not interested at all.
Yeah. I look at it where from my seat, Jane, like we're in a technology trap right now, because it's like, I get it, right? There's a lot of hype around AI and I understand it. I use it every single day. I also am trying to look a couple of steps downstream here and be like, all right, well, we still value community. We still value that tribal, like we're not as far removed from the need to be accepted by human beings. And it's like, how do we automate? And this is my strategy. I'm going to automate like 95% of my operation behind the scenes. But what will never be automated is if a carrier or a trucking company or a driver calls my company, we're going to talk to them person to person. Same thing with my customers. That communication gap will never be automated, because I truly feel what you're describing there, it's extremely nuanced. Everybody communicates differently. Like, I look at my customers that I have, some of them want to be texted, some of them want to be called, some of them want to be emailed, some of them don't even want to hear from me unless there's a problem. Yep. And it's like, you got to break it down. So it is, you can't fit everything in a box. And I feel like that's something, I've been out of corporate America for a very long time now, Jane. Like, I've worked for small companies. I've been self-employed now for almost 6 years. And I now, when you put it into that analogy of like, they're just trying to put it all in a box, that was the first thing I thought of is I'm like, I think that's why I struggled in corporate as much as I did, of like, it was so inauthentic in the communication where it was like, wait, everybody got the same happy birthday email.
I know.
Yes. Just copy and paste stuff. And it's it's the most impersonal thing out there. And it's like, but everybody, when it comes to their culture, they're like, oh, we're a family, but we're going to send you all the same automated message that every employee gets, regardless of tenure and everything else.
Or we'll send you a birthday card that's been stamped with somebody's signature. That's really touching and heartfelt. Thank you so much. Yeah. And it's why I always have had a thing about Driver Appreciation Week. And not that Driver Appreciation Week isn't, a good thing to do, but it can't be the only time that you actually show your drivers any appreciation, and mistakenly actually just appreciate the office staff because the drivers can't be routed into the terminal where all the food is being made. So like, drivers notice that. And so when you're inauthentic about what you're trying to do, like, you just kind of go, I'm just going to do something, what can we do for a Driver Appreciation Week? But don't ask the drivers, don't ask the drivers for suggestions. And you come across as not caring, inauthentic. And that feeling of family, I would say, I don't think carriers, I don't think the leadership of carriers have the right to say that. The only people who can say this feels like family are the people who are in it. And so what we do when we talk to Best Fleet, because what happens with Best Fleets, it's not, the whole process starts with the nomination, then the carriers fill out a huge questionnaire, and then we interview them. So we get a lot of interaction with the fleets about what their programs are and how they, what they're doing for drivers. And if they want to claim that, this is a family, it's a big family, everybody feels like family, I don't believe them until I see it from the drivers, because the drivers have to be saying it feels like family. Otherwise, it's a dysfunctional family. And one person feels like one way, and another one feels quite differently. So what I've done is, through the whole Best Fleets process, it's kind of a way to coach fleets into not making these statements about how great they are, but putting their money where their mouth is and actually developing programs that help drivers out with whatever it is that they need help with. So if there's no parking, what is a fleet doing about that? Or I'm spending too much time at a shipper, what's the fleet doing about that? Or I've been harassed, or I've been treated badly, what does the fleet do about that? So it's that is how you find out how fleets communicate. You find out how they communicate with their drivers. They often communicate with you, like me, that same way, and sometimes it's terrible. You find out about that, and you find out about their authenticity, about do they really believe what they're doing, or are they just trying to tell me a nice answer to the question that I have so that they can get a prize at the end?
Do you think that how much of this is just a direct correlation to driver turnover? Or have you seen companies out there that actually do check the box on a lot of what you're describing here of the right things, but they're still experiencing a lot of driver turnover? Is it like an industry, more of like a job thing, or is there a lot of correlation into the people who go against everything you're talking about right here, and they have a higher turnover ratio as opposed to the carriers out there who, they have truck parking, they, if there's a driver who gets harassed at a shipper or receiver, they take care of it, they address it, they got their backs. Do you see any direct correlations between that and driver turnover?
Absolutely. It's no question. There is, and sometimes good fleets will have high turnover for whatever reason. Like, they might have a blip. They might have a bad year or a good year. Like, COVID made everything crazy. And, the last couple of bad economic years have made it a little like turnover a little bit higher. But in general, as you communicate more with people, the more the driver turnover goes down, or your attention goes up, as well as your ability to communicate. And what sometimes happens is that fleets who are trying sometimes get it wrong. They just make a mistake. And it's really about how they fix it. And if they don't fix it and things get worse and, stuff happens, and then they're not on the top 20 anymore, like they're not a best fleet. But what I find that the fleets who really, really value the program, and because what it does is it isn't just about me giving you a score and then giving you a trophy at the end. It's about continuous improvement. So as these fleets get better and better at communicating with their drivers and figuring out the methods of how they get information from their drivers, like a driver committee or surveys, which I would say are out. Like, if you're just doing surveys right now, that's not the way to go. But finding like driver advocates, or like just finding ways to get information from their drivers, and then doing something with that information and communicating back out to the drivers. Like, as you do it and you keep doing it, progress and get better and better and better at it, then you just become like, you just get to a point where unless something really changes, you're your best fleet. You're doing it well. Your retention is really good. Like, I've seen fleets who have just, they really just don't have turnover. It's really, they have a waiting list for people to come on board. And, if you are now, I want to just say also that some fleets are not for, even if it's a best fleet, even if they have great turnover or whatever, sometimes it's just not the job for you.
Yeah.
And so that turnover is going to happen. But in general, I think that what you said is completely accurate. You make your fleet safer. You make your fleet fairer. You listen to concerns, and guess what? People stick around.
Yeah. No, so I'm looking at this, and I look at some of these companies that, you guys have a Hall of Fame category, and there's people that have been on this list 16 years, 12 years, 14 years, 14 years. And then there's some other ones that are in the large carrier, 16 years, and then the small carrier, 9 years. What correlation do all of these companies have between them? If you could look out, Jane, and say they all do this very well, what is that?
There's a couple of things. They all push further every year. They don't sit on their laurels. They find a way, they find a system of, like what I said, they all have a system of communicating with their drivers, getting their feedback, acting on that feedback, and keeping that cycle going. They all have that. That's like the basis, that's table stakes. But what they do in addition, and this is part of the program, you kind of have to, is you start pushing the industry forward. You start doing something else. You also look back on the things that were working and make sure that they're still working. But it's that pushing the industry forward. So when the under 21 driving program, the federal program came in, it was best fleets who were trying it out to see if they could make that work. When carriers, during the pandemic, when schools became a thing and ELDT started happening, that was where the best fleets were right there. Hiring military veterans, best fleets were right there. Reefs Across America, they're right there. They're involved in the community. They're involved in what helps trucking's image. They're not afraid to do something and look at it and say, well, did that really work? And they are pretty honest with us. Like, I find it really, what I really like is how frank some of them are with us about what they've tried and what's failed and what they did to make it better.
I look at it as, there's a carrier on your guys' Hall of Fame that has almost 8,000 drivers on it. And I look at that and it's like, because generally when you see the larger fleets or the larger brokers, they naturally have a bad reputation out there in the market, right? For some way or another. And I always want to remind people, and again, I just have a different perspective on a lot of things, like, as somebody who's founded a company and I'm trying to figure it out, like, I don't think people understand. You don't mistakenly become a multi-billion-dollar company because you don't know what you're doing and you don't operate at a very high level. I think like that's not a mistake. Like, you can maybe fake your way up to, a couple $1 million in revenue and maybe a couple of trucks, or you got a couple of couple employees in your brokerage. But like, when you start playing at that level, I just don't see how you can't, when people are like, oh, you don't know what you're doing, right? So it's like, when I look at this trucking company, I've heard a lot of really good things about them behind the scenes, because I get a lot of inbound information from the streets. I don't pay attention to a lot of it because it's really hard to corroborate what's true and what's not. But it's like, to see a mega carrier on there, that they have to have probably, I would assume, one of the lower turnover rates in the country, because like, to seat that many trucks consistently, like, that's not easy.
Yeah. And they have, well, what I find with the really big companies is that there have been a few that have been part of the program and have been at Best Fleet. And what they do is they kind of shy away from sharing information. Like, I call it the colonoscopy of workplace program, because it's like, we want to know, because everything that touches a driver, you like that? Yeah. Everything that touches a driver, and especially after a certain age, you really appreciate that. But everything that touches a driver is going to affect that driver's happiness in their job. And some really large companies don't care. Like, that's not what it's about for them. They're pricing in turnover as a part of doing business. And they don't want to tell us what their turnover is. And they don't want to, they're happy to tell us how great they are, but they don't want to tell us anything objective, because they don't want, if they're public companies, I can understand that. But as what I really like about the company you're talking about is that they have, they didn't actually make it for a while. Like, they were in it for a few years before they actually made it. And you could see the improvement. Like, you could see changes, and you could see they have some really cool programs. Yeah. And so the other thing that I'll say about really large companies who participate, not that you can't be on the top 20 and be a large company, it's a different approach than when you're a small company. I mean, you have to really have your stuff together. You definitely do, to make sure that the programs that you have in place are hitting the mark. And as you get bigger, it's harder to deal with that. But they do. They have programs that they change them. They have new stuff coming up. They have a lot of opportunities for drivers to talk directly to management. They basically have all of the things that I talked about. They do the same things, and they see the same results. And I find we have a number of larger companies who've been part of the program, and the success is always about that: is communicate, listen to the people that you work with, tell them what you're going to change, and keep it going and keep pushing.
Yeah. And I'm not mentioning any of the company's names because you can if you want. I just don't want to show any biases out there.
Well, you can go to bestfleets2drive.com and take a look. Like, you can see all of the winners from the time that we started. So
I was going to say, do you brought up, and I know that this mega fleet is a private company. Do you see any correlations between publicly traded companies being a higher turnover rate and the private companies out there? Do you see that?
Yeah, I think that, and we have had publicly traded companies be part of the program, but their pressures are coming from different places. So, if you are, and unfortunately, it's really difficult to have a company where your priority is very much about the happiness of the workforce. For most larger companies, that there's a balance, and the balance is often in favor of profits. That's basically it. But that's fine. Like, I think, and I'm not talking about companies on the top 20, our top 20. I'm just talking about companies in general. If it works for you, if what the company is offering you works for you, then it can be, even if it's not technically a best place to work, it's a good place to work for you, and for you at the time that you are there. What I think is important, and what we try to talk to fleets about, and I would like to have the opportunity to talk to drivers more about it, is how to find that place that's good for you to work. Because a lot of drivers will just look at the, cents per mile, how much am I going to make? And that's not what you should be looking for. You should be looking for something that matches your values. And that's what happens with the best fleets. They're not just bringing in headcount. Like, they're more concerned about if this is a fit. Yeah. Because these are the routes that I have. This is the kind of jobs that I have. Do you want them? And do you want to do this work? And how long you're going to do this work? And what do how do you feel about, the environment that you're coming into? So that works really, really well for fleets. When fleets are very particular about the kind of driver that they bring on, or the kind of employee that they bring on, they have way more success. Because if you are trying to have a one-size-fits-all that comes into your company and then try and fix them, or trying to put them into a bucket, you're going to have a lot of unhappy people, because people don't want that.
You guys have, I wanted to point out the small fleet category, because that's one. And I, as a small business owner myself, I love seeing that representation out there. And it's like, I think most people fail to realize that like 95% of the industry is small business, right? 10 trucker, 25 trucker, stuff like that. And have you seen any of the small fleets out innovating any of the mega carriers? Because I think that there's a false sense of like, oh, they're big, they got it all figured out. I'm a small business. There's nothing I could do to potentially recruit that talent away. So how are the smaller fleets potentially out innovating the larger, companies that are out there?
That's a really good question. It was a small fleet. They're not in the top 20 this year, but it was a small fleet who, and I think they were around 150, 200 trucks. So small, not tiny. The overall winner, the Hall of Fame overall winner, is a tiny fleet. It's 25 trucks. So they've done really well. Let me go with the fleet that did the really good innovation a few years ago. Was I don't know, maybe 8 years ago. It was a while ago. They did something called Rate My Load, which is now it's now part of systems. This whole, you deliver a load, or you pick up a load, and you go and rate the shipper or the receiver or whatever. That was an innovation that was one of the top 20, one of the best fleets to drive for. And they just had it as a little app on their phone, and just said, just tell us how it went. And that just became, like, we talked about it forever, because we thought it was such a great idea, is that if you're going to comment on the driver and how well the driver did, well, why don't we talk about the other side of it? So that was a small company innovation. So the other innovation, and this is not an innovation now, but way before scorecards, back in the old prehistoric times, before we had cameras and automated scorecards, before CSA, the fleet who won the overall FTC transportation, they just did it in Excel. They had a whole system of scorecard. Like the director of safety had an Excel spreadsheet that she used for a scorecard for 25 drivers, and had it for a rewards program. Like everything that people are doing now automated, she was doing by hand. And I thought that was an amazing innovation, because that was, everybody should be, if you can do it with Excel, and she would share this Excel spreadsheet with anyone who asked, which is another hallmark of Best Fleets, is that they're like, no, here's the tool that I'm using, take it. And that sharing and the, taking ideas from other people has really helped them all. They all say they take ideas, they share ideas, they think it's a positive thing. And I think in the industry, I think that even pushes, that's an innovation by itself.
I think people would be shocked at how willing people are to help them if they're willing to ask for said help. That's one thing that I will say I had to overcome with my ego in my career is thinking I need to have everything figured out, and like asking for help's a weakness. And man, I wish I would have realized a lot sooner that, like, damn, so many people are really willing to help you if you're willing to ask for it. And I think that's what I love the most about this industry is like, there are so many people who are willing to help you out. And especially if they've been in that situation before, they're willing to share with what works for them. If you have the courage to go up and ask, and you see that somebody's doing something right. And, I look at this here, Jane, as we're wrapping up, it's like, if there's anybody who's paying attention to this list out here, they're listening to this show, and maybe their turnover's at 90% out there, what's an audit they should be doing on their culture? Like, what's the first thing they should look at about what to improve?
What I would do is, if you're really interested in improving, is go through the Best Fleets process. Like, go get a driver to nominate you. It's not very hard to get nominated. You just have to ask a driver to do it. The driver doesn't have to do anything except fill out a form. And when you go through the questions, and these questions have been changed throughout, like, over the last 20 years, we've adapted them based on what the industry is doing. So these questions are like, they're up to date. They're talking about things that are happening now. Go through the questions and answer them honestly. Take a group of people, take a committee or whatever it is, go through those questions, go through the process, have the interview. It doesn't matter if you're on the top 20 or not. But what will happen is it will tell you, and it won't be that I'm giving you the answers. You will see the answers yourself. You'll see where the gaps are, and you'll see where you have opportunities to improve things. You can also go through the process. Also, figure out a way to ask your drivers how things are going without doing it in a survey. I would do it through a driver committee, or ask a driver committee what the best way is. Like, ask a couple of questions, like, what's the best thing that, what's the thing you like best about working for this company? And the second question is, what would you like to change at this company? And those two questions are magical in what they tell you.
No, I love it. Jane, thank you so much for that. This interview flew by. I feel like we should have, we could have went on for a while here, but, I just appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you having this out there for carriers who are doing the right thing, because it's like in a world filled with negativity out there, I love seeing people being able to highlight what is the best practices out there in business, because it's hard enough to make it. It's hard enough to scale your business, and to have resources that you can look at and follow and apply those strategies. That to me was what it's all about. That's what I love about what you do with this. How does anybody reach out to you to find out more about what you guys got going on, though?
Well, you can go to the website. You can contact us through the website. You can send a message to info@bestfleets.com. I'm Jane at CarriersEdge.com. So you can, drop me a line. If you're interested in talking to one of the top 20 that are on that list, and you send me a message, and I can, there's a good chance I can connect you with someone who can give you some suggestions of what you can do.
Perfect. Jane, thank you so much for your time. That is going to be it, everybody. If you guys can't find Jane, Best Fleets, Carrier's Edge, anything, hit me up. I will gladly put you guys in contact with them. But that's going to be it for today. As always, if you got value in what you heard and you're not subscribed, subscribe to the show, you guys. And if you're feeling ambitious, rank that show on iTunes and Spotify, because if you see value, your network's going to see it as well. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys. And we'll be talking to you soon.
Came back with a bank. Window down, yelling out money, anything. Ayy.